course, to our panel tonight, the Conservative Chief Whip, Michael Gove, and the Mail on Sunday columnist, Peter Hitchens. Appears.
Was tonight's debate a reflection of the chaotic and uncertain government we should expect after the general election? The
sight of all seven, and you're making the assumption, presumably, that nobody gets an overall majority?
Yes,
yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Michael Gove.
I think tonight's debate was a reflection of the chaotic and uncertain government we could have after the next election, absolutely. I think that one person emerged as a very effective leader of the opposition, and that was Nicola Sturgeon, and one person emerged as someone who was truly prime ministerial, and that was David Cameron. And unfortunately, at the next election, there is only, to my mind, there is a clear choice. And unfortunately, if we have Ed Miliband as Prime Minister, the way in which he will be sustained in office is through votes from the Scottish National Party. Given the performance that Nicola Sturgeon gave tonight, it's clear that she and Alex Salmond would hold the whip hand in any Ed Miliband-led administration. And that would lead to more taxes, more borrowing, more welfare spending. And I think a recipe for chaos as the party that bankrupted Britain in the past and the party that wants to break up Britain in the future try to cobble together some sort of Frankenstein government for the next 5 years.
A lot of people seem to rather admire Nicola Sturgeon. Yeah?
Yes, well...
absolutely.
People do admire Nicola Sturgeon because she's a very effective operator. But what I fear is that if we have Nicola and Alex Salmond determining what happens, then we will have the government of the United Kingdom shaped in the interests of only one part of the kingdom rather than all of us, and I think that would be a mistake.
OK, and the third row there.
Andy, you were talking about Ed Miliband talking to the country tonight. I'll tell you what we saw tonight. We saw a great picture of politics in this country. We saw a lot of over-preparation and people talking too much. At the end of the day, most of them looked absolutely fake. The only one who looked like he was actually having a proper conversation with people on the other side of the screen, for all, whether we disagree with his policy or not, was Nigel Farage. He's the only one who looked like he was actually having a proper chat with you. Okay. And that's the problem with politicians in this country, is that you remove yourselves too far from the ordinary man. I don't think most of you are weird, as a lot of people do, but you make yourselves weird by simply just not being real. And I don't know whether that's fear of being too real and exposing too much, or whether it's you feel like we want to see this fake sort of, a demeanour. At the end of the day, talk to us like we're real people, because you're real, we're all in this country, apparently together.
Well, I think there's no question you're right about that, because Mr Farage began by saying quite correctly that it was 6 against 1. 6 establishment parties, 6 pro-European Union parties, 6 pro-mass immigration parties, 6 parties completely steeped in the liberal Blairism, which infects them all. And he was the one alternative. I mean, many of us have criticisms of Mr Farage, but he did actually put across a point of view which is simply not represented properly in Parliament. And I think that went across.
Point of view across differently. It was like he looked real. Now, I'm not saying I agree with him or disagree with him, but he just looked real.
Well, I think the two things are connected. The others had all been sent there. They've been trained extensively by spin doctors, rehearsed incessantly, so that they would not commit any news. The whole idea of their being there was not to make any mistakes, to expose themselves to any further danger. Farage wasn't worried about that. He actually wanted to be news because he wants people to know that he exists. And I think that was his major success. And I think that was the most important element of the debate.
Daniel, the audience, because a lot of hands up, and I want to hear your views about this, not just the panels.
A simple test question for Michael Gove. In a seat in Scotland, which is marginal, between Labour and the SNP, who do you really hope will win?
I certainly don't want the SNP to win any seats. I would rather have...
You would rather Labour won that
Let me answer the question. It's a tough question.
One or the other.
No. First of all, Peter, I would always urge people to vote Conservative in any seat, but I would rather our United Kingdom was preserved. And so for that reason, one of the reasons why I stood with the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats in the campaign, better together, was because I believe that our United Kingdom is more important than any individual political party.
So, from the point of...
Hold on. Wasn't in any way an answer to the question.
From the point of view of the United Kingdom, you would therefore prefer, if there weren't an overall Tory majority, an overall Labour majority, so they could rule without having to deal in any way with the SNP.
I do not want the
SNP.
That's what he's saying,
yeah. Well, the Labour
is almost like hatred, Michael. It's a legitimate party. Its popularity is going up,
Absolutely.
unlike every other party. Is it jealousy? What is it?
OK, let's go to
No,
members
it's a
of our
fundamental disagreement, yes.
All right, we'll go to members of our audience. A woman in the middle there, at the, a bit to the... Yes, you at the back. Second row from the back, yes.
Personally, I think it's a far more dangerous prospect for the Tories to be doing a deal with the UKIP than it is for Labour to be doing a deal with the SNP.
And you think they might?
I think they might. To get a majority government.
Have the Tories ruled out doing any kind of arrangement with UKIP?
We've got absolutely no interest in being anything other than a majority Conservative government.
Yeah, that's not the answer to the question.
I'm not interested in doing a deal with anyone.
Has it been ruled out officially? That's what he asked.
I don't believe that we've said that we wouldn't consider, for example, talking to, in the event of having a minority, other parties to support us, but we're not interested.
No, he's asked the pertinent question.
Yes.
Have you publicly ruled out any deal with UKIP? The 2 or 3 or 4 UKIP members.
We're listening, Michael.
That Peter Hitchens question was hard, but that's an easy one. You can answer that one.
You've got to be interested because he's asking you the question. You can't say you're not interested.
Michael,
we need to know.
I think you can take from that they are thinking about doing a deal with UKIP. That's the clear... That is what's happening.
Given that you are, as we know, an enthusiastic Blairite, would you rather a deal with Labour, a grand coalition of the German type, rather than have a government dominated by the SNP?
I don't want to have any grand coalition or any coalition of any kind. I want a majority Conservative
government. I know you don't want one, but would you do one?
And that's what I'm concentrating on doing. And I think, in a way, one of the points that's been made by the speculation about post-election coalitions is that a majority government of whatever kind would provide a greater degree of stability than coalitions would, particularly the chaotic coalition that seems most likely if the SNP do well, which is the prospect of the SNP trying to prop up Ed Miliband and Ed Miliband
doing the speculation about the
deal. So what I would rather do, is make the argument for a Conservative government implementing the policies which over the last 5 years have seen us move forward from the economic mess that we inherited to economic success.
You're the one who entered...
Orange shirt there. That's a political statement or not?
He wasn't elected as Prime Minister last time, but tonight he spoke about getting a majority. What does David Cameron think has changed since the last election that somehow he's going to get the mandate of the people?
All right.
Well, I think the thing that's changed is that we inherited a country which was, compared to Greece economically, and now, after 5 years, we've
hardly ever Greece.
Well,
excuse me.
That was at the time. At the time, the markets were genuinely worried because the scale of the deficit, the problems that we had economically, meant those comparisons were being made. Now, after 5 years, we've created, thanks to the hard work of the British people, 1.9 million new jobs, 1,000 jobs created every day.
We were never in the economic depths that Greece is in today. I'm sorry, there's a completely fallacious comparison.
We were certainly facing big economic difficulties, and it's certainly the case.
Can we stop this record ever? It's not true. This country is £1.5 trillion in debt.
Yes.
Which it wasn't when you took over. There has been no increase in productivity. There has been no increase substantially in exports. There has been instead an enormous increase in immigration, a vast number of low-wage jobs. All they've done is they've created a low-wage economy and a lot of statistics and a lot of borrowed money. And to proclaim this as an economic triumph is particularly irresponsible because when the election's over, they'll be back to you again saying, hey, look, things are really terrible and we're going to have to introduce all kinds of tax rises and spending cuts we never mentioned before. Now they're saying it's a triumph. In 6 months' time, they'll be admitting what it really is. 1.5 trillion national debt is incredible. I wish they'd stop saying it. This isn't true.
I want to go back to the...
Could I answer your question?
Answered.
It's very... David Cameron actually doesn't know the difference between the deficit and the national debt. And in a speech actually confused them. The deficit is the shortfall between spending and income each year. And that the government said it would get rid of, and it hasn't. The national debt is what we owe cumulatively, year upon year upon year. That has grown immensely, exponentially under this government. They're two different things.
Hear a question from you, please.
Yes. With public services stretched to the max, do we now say that the country is full?
Do we now say the country is full? Peter Hitchens.
Well, yes, it is. And I think the country simply wasn't designed for the level of population that it has in terms of housing, in terms of transport, in terms of education, in terms of health provision. We simply haven't got enough. And both the major parties, but all three major parties, have got together in this belief that large-scale immigration is part of the solution of the economic problems they've created. What they've never understood is that actually you can't impose on people this level of mass immigration, not just because of the physical problems, which are great, because if your children are at a school which is affected by it, or if your local health service is affected by it, it is a serious problem. And one word, by the way, to Yasmin, who keeps going on about how people are against migrants. Nobody who's seriously against immigration has any animus against migrants whatsoever. I admire these people. I've lived abroad a couple of times in my life under wonderful conditions with a great deal of help. Anybody who can uproot himself and come to another country has my complete admiration. And they do what they do because they think it's sensible and because they're brave and enterprising. Nothing against them. But we as a country encourage them, the politicians encourage them to come, create the conditions in which they come, and they are the ones who need to be challenged. Yes, we are full. It's plain that we're full. And not merely is it doing great harm to our social services and to our health service and to our education and our transport and our housing, it's also doing great social harm because you simply can't, in a civilised fashion, absorb this number of people at once. People need time to integrate and to become British. They can't do it at this rate. It's never been attempted before. An experiment on this scale has never been attempted before in this country. And it doesn't seem to me to be working.
And so you must leave the EU, in effect, to stop free movement of people.
For any measure of self-government, we would have to leave the European Union because these decisions are not taken by us. And if you want decisions about the governing of your country to be taken elsewhere, then these are the people to come to. Right. They can arrange it for you. They will collect the salaries and they'll sit in the ministerial offices and they'll pose with the red boxes and they'll pass the decisions upwards to Brussels and Frankfurt and Luxembourg, where these things are actually done. But if you actually want it done yourself, you have to say, actually, oddly enough, most countries in the world, given the chance to become independent, including most of our former empire, we say, wonderful, you're independent, great, raise your flag, control your own affairs. We ourselves run away from independence. We seem to think that we're unable to cope with it. And why is that?
Michael Gove, you said that in the present circumstances, given a vote today, you'd vote to leave the EU. Pete Hitchens said you're using immigration to keep a low-wage economy and keep the economy growing at the pace it's growing at. What do you say to that? Is it
well,
true?
in direct answer to the lady's question, is Britain full? No, it is not full. I think that I think it's important to stress, yes, that migration levels have been too high in the past. We need to bring them down, but it is a good thing when talented people who want a better life and who can contribute to this country come here, in our public services, in our NHS. The nurses and doctors who care for us, in many cases, come from outside the United Kingdom and outside the European Union. There are gifted teachers in state schools who've come from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and who are contributing to making sure that our children grow up with wider horizons. I think it's critically important to make sure that we have a balanced approach towards immigration, because our country has succeeded in the past by being open, by being inclusive, by being a united kingdom. And I think that the debate on immigration has been poisoned by those who say that we should pull up the barriers, and it's also been damaged by those who say we should have an open door. We need a balanced approach which works in Britain's interests and shows us to be the generous and open nation that I've always believed us to be.
All right.
But Michael, why aren't we, you say we should bring people in from abroad to do these things, why aren't we training our own teachers and our own nurses? And why is it morally acceptable to plunder poor countries of their trained people, who they've spent a fortune on training to bring them here? And also, how is it that in all this growth of employment there is still almost 1 million, as you should know, having been an education secretary, almost 1 million people, young people, not in education, employment or training?
Jackie Lloyd, what do you think?
Why is that so?